Adekunle Balogun watched Ikoyi from the tinted window of the SUV, his expression as still as someone who had learned to hide exhaustion behind discipline. The midday sun burned on the glass, scattering reflections of high-rises, communication masts, and billboards like blades of light across the city. Beside him, Zainab Bello was talking about the choice of flowers for their wedding, but her voice seemed too calculated to belong to an emotional bride-to-be. She described white lilies, rare orchids, and a ceremony for 600 guests, while he only sensed her presence. The driver moved a few meters at a time, stuck in a line of cars that made wealth seem useless in the face of Lagos traffic. Adekunle wore a dark blue suit, discreet and impeccable, and on his wrist was a watch worth more than many flats in the city. Even so, at that moment, nothing on his face betrayed any vanity. His brown eyes, firm and accustomed to hostile boardrooms, carried a shadow that neither business journals nor official portraits could capture when they called him the brilliant heir to the Balogun group. Zainab leaned towards him, lightly touching his sleeve with nails painted in a pale shade. She was beautiful in a planned way, from the hair styled without a single strand out of place, to the studied serenity with which she smiled for photographers and ministers. The daughter of an influential senator, she had learned early that tenderness could be used like a silk glove over the hand of ambition. To the world, she and Adekunle were the perfect couple. To Adekunle, they were a sensible alliance, perhaps comfortable, perhaps necessary. "You're somewhere else again," she said, without losing her softness. "Today is not a day to carry the entire company on your shoulders. It's just a lunch, Kunle. An important lunch, but still just a lunch." He turned his face to her and offered a short, polite, almost absent smile. "I'm listening. White lilies at the entrance, orchids in the main hall. No red roses because they seem too obvious." Zainab smiled with satisfaction, though her eyes examined him like someone measuring a crack in a valuable wall. "Then repeat the part about my father." Adekunle took a deep breath, not annoyed. "Your father wants me to confirm public support for the coastal road project before the ceremony. He believes the wedding will make the approval simpler and that the market will react well to the stability between our families." "It's not just what he believes," Zainab replied. "It's what everyone knows. You need political influence to unlock your concessions. My family needs corporate competence to clean up our image after the last accusations. We are both too intelligent to pretend this isn't part of our future." Her frankness did not surprise him. Zainab had never sold him love as if it were innocence. The agreement between them had been born in discreet dinners, conversations between aides, and a silent understanding that powerful people rarely married for passion alone. Even so, there were moments when Adekunle wondered if the absence of passion was maturity or cowardice. This question always arose like an old whisper, bringing with it the name he had avoided for 5 years, Chiamaka Okoro. The car braked again near a crowded bus stop, squeezed between a closed newspaper kiosk and a stubborn mango tree that survived the concrete. Adekunle looked out of simple impatience, not expecting to find anything but strangers waiting for transport under the heat. First, he saw a boy with a red backpack holding a toy car. Then he saw another boy identical to him, with the same broad forehead, the same brown hair falling over his eyes, the same way of pursing his lips before asking something. Adekunle's hand tightened on the seat. The air inside the car seemed to thin, and the sound of horns receded as if the city had plunged underwater. Between the two boys stood a woman in a simple dress, holding a shopping bag against her body, and fixing one of the children's hair with a tired, precise, loving gesture. The sun touched her face from the side, revealing thinner cheekbones, faint dark circles, and the same quiet firmness that had once made Adekunle believe the world could be less calculated. Chiamaka Okoro was not a hazy memory. She was a wound with perfect outlines. He remembered her laughter in a small bookstore, her low voice correcting his arrogant speeches, the courage with which she refused favors, and the night she disappeared without explanation, leaving only a short letter saying she couldn't continue. For months, he had hated her for leaving. For years, he had pretended he had forgotten her. Now she was there alive, exhausted, beautiful in a way that hurt, with 2 children who looked as if they had been carved from his own face. "Stop the car," Adekunle said. The driver hesitated, looking in the rearview mirror. "Oga, we are in the middle of the lane. Park wherever you can." "No." Zainab turned her head to the window and saw the bus stop. Her expression changed for only a second, so quickly that anyone less observant would have missed it. The smile vanished, then returned, colder, narrower. She didn't ask who the woman was. That, to Adekunle, was almost as revealing as Chiamaka's presence. Zainab just placed her handbag on her lap and said, in a controlled tone, that they were late for their reservation. Adekunle was no longer listening. The driver managed to pull the car to the curb amidst protests from an Okada and a Danfo bus that let out a groan of brakes. Before Zainab could stop him, Adekunle opened the door and stepped onto the hot tarmac. The city's noise returned with violence, a mix of engines, hawkers, hurried footsteps, and the distant cry of a child. Chiamaka looked up the exact moment he crossed the small distance between the armored SUV and the bus stop. For a moment, neither of them moved. Chiamaka held the handle of her bag tighter, and the boys stopped fighting over the toy car. The one closer to her looked at Adekunle with frank, unafraid curiosity, and that expression pierced the man's chest like a sentence. It was like looking at a photograph of his own childhood before the boarding schools, before the board meetings, before his father taught him that emotions were bad currency in tough negotiations. Amaka, he said, and the name came out low, hoarse, almost unrecognizable. She turned pale but didn't back away. There was tiredness in her eyes. Yes, and there was surprise. But above all, there was a wall built with years of humiliation. Adekunle. The boys looked at each other. The one with the red backpack tugged at her skirt. Mummy, does he know you? Chiamaka lowered her hand and gently touched her son's shoulder. He knew me a long time ago, Emeka. The other boy, Chidi, took a half-step forward and stared at Adekunle with childish insolence. Do you work inside that big jeep? Adekunle tried to answer, but his throat failed him. The resemblance between the children left him defenseless. Emeka had the small mark on his chin that he himself had inherited from his mother. Chidi raised an eyebrow when he was suspicious, exactly as Adekunle did when faced with poorly prepared reports. He felt all the theories he had constructed to explain Chiamaka's departure crumble to dust. She hadn't just left. She had taken with her a truth that someone had denied him. How old are they? He asked, though he already knew the question could destroy him. Chiamaka's face hardened. This is not a conversation for the street. Amaka, I need to know. You lost the right to need anything when you chose to believe what was convenient for you. The sentence hit him with precision. Zainab approached from behind, too elegant for this scene of broken concrete and torn posters. She placed a hand on Adekunle's arm in a public gesture of possession and gave Chiamaka a look that mixed pity and warning. Darling, this isn't appropriate. We can resolve any misunderstanding through our lawyers. There are photographers everywhere now, and you know how a scene like this can be twisted. Chiamaka laughed, without joy. Lawyers. Of course. They always arrive before the truth when the rich are afraid. Zainab maintained her smile. I don't believe we've met. You know exactly who I am, Chiamaka replied. The silence that followed revealed more than any confession. Adekunle looked at Zainab, searching for a surprise that wasn't there. His fiancée held his gaze with a dangerous serenity, as if asking him to remember where he was, who he was, and what he would lose if he took another step towards the woman at the bus stop. But Adekunle had already taken that step internally. Something old, buried under duty and pride, was beginning to rise. Zainab, go back to the car, he said. She tightened her fingers on his arm. Don't be rude in a way that will have consequences. I said go back. For the first time, her mask wavered in front of strangers, not from pain, but from contained fury. Chiamaka noticed and instinctively protected her sons, pulling them closer. A Danfo bus approached, its destination board showing the route that would probably take them far away. Chiamaka looked at the vehicle with quiet desperation, like someone needing to escape before the life she had painstakingly built was invaded by a storm of surnames, money, and cameras. Adekunle saw this movement and understood that if she got on that bus, he might lose her again. But he also saw her fear, and that fear stopped him from acting like the man accustomed to buying his way through urgency. He bent down slightly, getting closer to the children's height without touching them. Emeka clutched the strap of his backpack. Chidi continued to stare at him with a courage that seemed both small and immense. My name is Adekunle, he said. I don't want to scare you. Did you scare Mummy? Chidi shot back. Chiamaka closed her eyes for a second, as if her son's sincerity had torn a curtain. Adekunle raised his gaze to her. I never wanted to scare you. Wanting wasn't necessary. You just had to let others do it for you. Zainab let out a short laugh behind him. This is getting theatrical, isn't it, Chiamaka? I imagine you've spent years waiting for this moment. But Adekunle has real commitments. If there's a financial matter, send a formal proposal. Don't turn children into an argument. Chiamaka took a step forward, and in that instant, the tired woman from the bus stop vanished, replaced by someone who had survived things Zainab would never understand. My sons are not an argument. They are people. And if you mention their names again as if they were a strategy, you will find out that poverty is not a synonym for silence. Her firmness made a few people around them look over. Adekunle felt ashamed, not of Chamaka, but of the chasm between that bus stop and the car blocking the street. He remembered meeting her when she worked as an analyst for an independent NGO that assessed the social impact of urban projects. Chamaka had confronted his team in a meeting, accusing the Balogun group of ignoring families displaced by a project. Everyone treated her as an inconvenience. He had listened to her, then fallen in love. Their love had been secret at first, not out of shame, but out of caution. She didn't want to be seen as a gold digger. He didn't want his father to turn their relationship into a dossier. For almost a year, they found refuge in modest places, bukas without valids, local cinemas, walks in the rain. Chamaka had shown him a city his helicopter never reached. Adekunle in turn had promised her he wouldn't be like the men who confused protection with control. Remembering that now made his promises feel like forged documents. The bus stopped in front of them, its doors opening with a metallic sigh. Chamaka held her son's hands. We're leaving. Please, give me 10 minutes, Adekunle begged. Anywhere public. No lawyers. No cameras. Just 10 minutes. I gave you months, Kunle. I gave you letters that never got a reply. I gave you news that came back marked as refused. I gave you the benefit of the doubt until I understood that doubt could also be a prison. Now, I give my sons lunch, pay the overdue rent, and teach them that dignity doesn't depend on a surname. He felt his blood run cold. Letters. Chamaka watched him with a pain that didn't ask for pity. Don't pretend. Not here. Zainab intervened, her sweetness gone. Adekunle, that's enough. You're exposing yourself for a woman who clearly harbors convenient resentments. We get in the car now, or my father will know you chose a street scene over a meeting that defines the future of your group. The threat was clean, almost elegant. Adekunle looked at his fiancée and saw not the partner of an upcoming wedding, but the perfect representative of a system that turned lives into game pieces. Maybe Zainab hadn't created the past, but she knew about it. Maybe she hadn't written refused on the letters, but she didn't seem surprised by them. This realization wasn't proof, and Adekunle knew to respect proof. However, for the first time in years, his instinct stopped being corporate and became human. Your father can wait, he said. Zainab paled, then recomposed her face. You will regret this. Perhaps, but not as much as I regret not asking questions 5 years ago. Chamaka looked away, and Adekunle realized that sentence had hurt her in a different way. For her, late regret didn't erase nights of fever, scans done alone, piling bills, doors closed by an invisible influence. Emeka and Chidi climbed onto the first step of the bus, but Chamaka didn't follow immediately. The conductor waited impatiently. People behind them grumbled. Ordinary life kept pushing the private tragedy forward, without ceremony. I don't want your money, Chamaka said in a low voice. I never did. I want you to stay away if you've come to bring wahala. They have a routine, they have school, neighbors, a grandmother who asks too many questions, and a mother who does her best so they don't miss what they never had. And they never asked about their father? The question escaped before Adekunle could measure its cruelty. Chamaka breathed as if she'd been struck. They asked. I told them some absences were hard to explain without hurting children. I said that one day, when they were older, they would know everything. I didn't imagine that day would begin with you stepping out of a luxury jeep next to the woman who helped bury my name. Zainab took a sharp step. Be careful what you claim. Chamaka faced her. I learned to be careful when I was pregnant, and a threatening letter arrived under my door. I learned when I lost my job after refusing a non-disclosure agreement. I learned when a doctor, paid by someone important, altered my medical file to make me look unstable. Don't confuse my calm with a lack of memory. Adekunle felt the world narrow. Altered file, non-disclosure agreement, threatening letter. Each word opened a door to a dark corridor. He turned to Zainab, but she was no longer smiling. Still, her voice came out low, venomous. She has no proof. Resentful people invent useful stories when they see an opportunity. Think about what you're risking for a story without documents. Documents can be found, Adekunle said. Zainab's gaze hardened. And reputations can be destroyed before that happens. Chamaka got on the bus, pulling her sons with her. Adekunle could have followed, could have forced his presence, could have used the name that opened gates and government offices, but something in her eyes stopped him. She didn't need another invasion. She needed, for the first time, for someone powerful to respect the line she drew. He stood on the pavement, watching Emeka look through the window. The boy raised his hand in an uncertain wave. Adekunle waved back, and that small gesture nearly undid him. The bus pulled away slowly, taking with it the woman he had loved, and the 2 sons who might be his. Zainab remained behind him, silent enough to inspire fear. The avenue became an avenue again. The horns became horns again. But Adekunle was no longer the same man who had left the car minutes before. The entire city seemed to be a witness to a trial that had not yet begun. He returned to the vehicle without looking at his fiancée, and the driver kept his eyes fixed on the steering wheel. Inside the car, Zainab's expensive perfume felt suffocating. She closed the door calmly and crossed her legs. "You'll thank me when you understand that I tried to prevent a disaster." Adekunle stared at the street where the bus had disappeared. "How long have you known? Don't play this ridiculous role of a man betrayed by fate. You're not naive, Kunle. Answer me." Zainab took a few seconds. "I knew she existed. Everyone knew. An inconvenient, emotional ex-girlfriend, linked to groups that always attacked your family. That doesn't mean I knew about children." The word children left her lips like an administrative detail. Adekunle turned his face slowly. "They look like me. Many children look like rich men, especially when their mothers need something." He looked at her with a coldness that made even Zainab fall silent. "Never speak of them like that again." The warning hung in the space between them, more intimate than any wedding vow. Zainab understood she had lost ground, but not the war. Her pride wouldn't allow a true retreat. She opened her handbag, took out her phone, and typed a message with quick fingers. Adekunle watched the movement without asking. He had spent his life sitting next to people who smiled while activating invisible machines. Only now did he realize how much he had confused efficiency with loyalty. "Cancel the lunch," he ordered the driver. "Take Miss Bello home, then wait for me in the office garage." Zainab lifted her chin. "You're not going to meet my father? Not today. Then choose your next move carefully, because afterwards you won't be able to pretend it was an impulse. My father doesn't tolerate public humiliation. The press doesn't forgive scandals. Your group's board doesn't like instability. And I, Adekunle, was not raised to be left waiting while my fiancée chases ghosts." He didn't reply. His silence was more dangerous than anger. Zainab realized too late that the encounter at the bus stop hadn't just awakened guilt. It had awakened the strategist everyone feared in negotiations. The man capable of waiting months for an opponent's mistake and then bringing down empires with a folder of documents. The difference was that this time, the empire under investigation might be his own circle, and Adekunle had never been more dangerous than when he discovered he had been used. Upon arriving in front of the Bello residence, Zainab got out without a goodbye. Before closing the door, she leaned back in and recovered her public softness, the same softness that deceived cameras. "We can still resolve this with elegance. Don't turn a memory into a ruin." Adekunle held her gaze. "A ruin is building a life on a lie." The door closed. The driver said nothing, but his hands revealed tension on the steering wheel. Adekunle picked up his phone and opened a contact list he rarely used. He stopped at the name Tunde Martins, former head of corporate security. A discreet man who owed his loyalty not to money, but to a moral debt. Tunde had warned him years ago that some people around the Balogun family knew too much about Adekunle's private life. At the time, he had ignored the warning. The call was answered on the second ring. "Oga Kunle. Tunde, I need you to find someone without scaring her, without approaching her, and without leaving a trail. Her name is Chiamaka Okoro. She was on a bus route near Ikoyi with 2 boys, Emeka and Chidi. I want an address, current job, and any legal, medical, or financial action linked to her name in the last 6 years." Tunde didn't ask why. Good professionals understood that the wrong questions delayed urgent truths. "Any limits?" Adekunle looked at his own reflection in the window. He looked older. "Yes. No invasion against her, no contact with the children, no pressure. If someone has already done that in my name, I want to know who." On the other end, there was a brief pause. "So, Oga, you finally want to look into that period?" Adekunle closed his eyes. The phrase confirmed there were shadows known to others, shadows he had preferred not to face. "I want to look into everything." When he hung up, the memory of Chiamaka at the bus stop returned with force. She wasn't just the woman he had loved. She was a mother holding shopping bags, counting coins, protecting 2 boys from a world that might have been cruel because of him. Adekunle felt a deep shame, but he didn't let himself sink into it. Shame without action was just wounded vanity. He needed facts, dates, names, documents. He needed to find out who had refused letters he had never seen. In the Balogun Group's office, the panoramic penthouse looked like a glass fortress over the city. Aides stood up when they saw him enter before the scheduled time, but he walked past them all without explaining the cancelled lunch. In his office, where models of bridges, terminals, and railway lines occupied a side table, Adekunle saw the cruel irony. He had built systems to move millions of people, but he might have left the woman he loved waiting for a bus with his children because he hadn't known how to cross the distance between power and truth. He called Funke Adewale, the in-house legal director and one of the few people assigned most to the Bellows. Funke entered with a tablet in her arms and the attentive gaze of someone who sensed storms before the thunder. She was a woman of curt speech, sharp intelligence, and a loyalty that was hard to buy. Adekunle had hired her precisely because she told him no when everyone else competed to say yes. Seeing him standing by the window, without his jacket, and with a devastated look, she closed the door carefully. "I need absolute confidentiality," he said. "Then don't use the company servers." Adekunle almost smiled, despite everything. "That's why I called you." Funke placed her tablet on the table. "Who are we facing?" He took a moment before answering, because saying it aloud made the suspicion real. "Perhaps my family. Perhaps the Bellows. Perhaps both." Funke showed no surprise, just pulled up a chair. "Then let's start properly. You're going to tell me everything, including the parts that make you look bad. Especially those." Adekunle told her. He spoke of Chiamaka, their hidden relationship, the goodbye letter, the pride with which he had accepted the story that she had abandoned him for convenience. He spoke of the boys at the bus stop and the accusations about refused letters, threats, an altered medical file, a non-disclosure agreement. As she listened, Funke took few notes. Her face expressed no judgment, but Adekunle knew the absence of judgment was not absolution. He didn't want absolution. He wanted the truth even if it condemned him. When he finished, Funke was silent for a few seconds. "If she was pregnant and someone hid that from you, there was a coordinated operation. Letters don't just disappear. Medical files don't change by accident. Jobs don't evaporate without phone calls. The question is, who had the most to gain?" Zainab said she knew about her. Zainab Bello knows many things before everyone else. It's one of that family's most expensive skills. Adekunle walked to his desk and opened an old drawer where he kept objects of no financial value. Among cards, keys, and photographs, there was a paper napkin from a small buka with a sentence written by Chiamaka in slanted handwriting. "You don't have to be smaller to fit into their world." She had written it on a rainy night. He held the paper as if it were evidence of an intimate crime. For 5 years, he had thought the sentence was ironic. Now it seemed like a warning. "Find the non-disclosure agreement," he said. "If it existed, someone paid for it." Funke nodded. "And you need to decide what you will do if the children are yours." Their question seemed simple but carried a continent. Adekunle looked again at the avenue, at the buses shrunken by the height, at the city that moved on without asking permission for anyone's pain. He saw Emeka waving. He saw Chidi saying he had scared his mother. He heard Chiamaka calling poverty a denied silence. For the first time in years, the future ceased to be a schedule organized by influential families and became an unlit road. "I will do what I should have done before," he answered. "I will earn the truth before I ask for any place in their lives." In the Bello mansion, Zainab walked into the main hall without waiting for the steward to announce her. Senator Aliyu Bello was standing by a window, talking on the phone with the paternal tone he reserved for useful allies and even more useful enemies. "We will see." He ended the call and frowned. Zainab didn't need to explain everything. Her face, though controlled, bore the mark of a public defeat, and Aliyu had always taught her that small defeats, when ignored, became fires. "He saw her," Zainab said. The senator didn't ask who, just walked to the sideboard and poured water into a crystal glass. "With the children?" "Yes." Aliyu drank slowly. He was a man with silver hair, a calm voice, and eyes incapable of guilt. For him, people were corridors of access. Some led to power, others blocked the way. Chiamaka Okoro had been a poor, young, sentimental, and underestimated obstruction. The mistake, he thought, might have been leaving her too intact, not physically, for Aliyu despised visible brutality, but socially. A woman with her dignity preserved could become dangerous when chance gave her back an audience. "Adekunle will investigate," Zainab said. "Naturally, men like him need to believe they command their own conscience. Don't play games with me, father." He sent me back to the car in front of her. His daughter's wounded vanity irritated Aliyu more than the news. Then stop acting like an offended fiancé and think like a bello. The woman has no resources. The boys have no name. If Adekunle gets close, it will look like guilt. If she talks, it will look like self-interest. We need to control the first public version before he finds anything. Zainab pressed her lips together. And what if there are documents we don't control? The senator smiled without joy. There are always documents. The question is, who finds them first, and who is still professionally alive to confirm them? She looked away, not out of moral fear, but calculation. Nothing crude. That would draw attention. My daughter, crudeness is the tool of the incompetent. We deal with reputations, bank credits, tenancy agreements, school headmasters, society column editors. A person's life can be crushed without anyone raising their voice. Meanwhile, in a small flat in Surulere, Chiamaka closed the door with her back and tried to breathe without her sons noticing the tremor in her hands. Emeka dropped his backpack on the worn sofa. Chidi placed the toy car on the table and continued watching his mother. Children perceived emotional cracks with a precision that adults underestimated. Chiamaka smiled, poured them some water, and asked about school. But her voice had a fragile delicacy, like glass held by the edges. "Is that man our father?" Emeka asked. The question landed in the flat with the weight of all the postponed years. Chiamaka rested both hands on the sink. She could lie again, turn the truth into a story for later. But her son's eyes held the same plea she had made to the world so many times. Don't treat me as if I can't handle the truth. She turned slowly, knelt before them, and touched a face with each hand, trying to be firm without being harsh. He might be, she replied. But being a father isn't just about looking like someone. Being a father is about caring, protecting, showing up when things are difficult. And that, we still need to understand. Chidi frowned. Did he know about us? Chiamaka felt her eyes burn. This was the question that would haunt her forever, because her old answer no longer seemed so certain after seeing Adekunle's devastated face. I thought so. Emeka looked down. And what if he didn't know? Chiamaka didn't answer. She hugged them both tightly, as if she could protect them not just from Zainab, the Bellos, and the Baloguns, but also from hope. Hope was dangerous. It crept in through small cracks, reorganized memories, and weakened defenses built with so much sacrifice. Chiamaka had survived because she had learned to expect little from those who had much. However, the image of Adekunle asking about the letters made her heart beat against a door she had sworn to lock. That night, Adekunle stayed alone in his office until the city lights became artificial constellations. Tunde sent the first piece of information shortly after 10 p.m. Chiamaka Okoro worked at a community education cooperative. She had 2 sons enrolled in a respected public school. No lawsuit for child support, no case against the Balogun family. There were, however, strange records of a dismissal for incompatible conduct from a former NGO, a medical debt paid by an unknown third party, and a power of attorney filed at the registry office under an unusual seal. Adekunle read each line without blinking. Nothing there looked like the work of a woman trying to get rich. It looked, instead, like the trail of someone pushed out of every door. Funke, sitting across from him, received the same data in silence. When she reached the reference to the power of attorney, she looked up. This smells of a forced agreement. Can we get access? Legally, with difficulty. Illegally, quickly. But if we want to take down powerful people, we can't give them the perfect excuse. We'll do it the right way. Adekunle nodded. Before, he would have demanded immediate results. Now he understood that haste could repeat the violence of others. Chiamaka deserved for the truth to be built without new violations. He picked up his phone and typed a message to an old number he still knew by heart, though he had never had the courage to use it. He wrote, deleted, wrote again. In the end, he sent only a few words, because any speech would sound like a defense before its time. Amaka, it's me. I won't show up without your permission, but I believe they lied to both of us. I want to hear from you when you're ready. In the small flat, Chiamaka's phone vibrated on the table while the boys slept in their room. She read the message once, then again. Pride told her to delete it. Pain told her to reply with anger. Caution told her to block the number. But an old part of her, the part that still recognized Adekunle's voice before the world had distorted it, remained still. Chiamaka didn't reply. She just placed the phone face down and turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, she heard her son's breathing and understood that the life she had protected with so much effort had just entered a war. On the other side of the city, Adekunle also stared at the screen without a response, accepting that silence could be the first form of justice Chiamaka imposed on him. Between them, Zainab and Aliyu were already moving in visible pieces. But the first crack was open, and through it, a truth that no surname could contain forever was beginning to enter. The dawn found Chiamaka Okoro before her alarm clock went off. The gray light seeped through the gaps in the thin curtain, casting a tired glow on the small kitchen where the kettle was already whistling, and 2 lunchboxes lay open, waiting for bread, a banana, and the little cheese that was left. She moved in silence, accustomed to measuring each gesture so as not to wake the boys too early. Still, her mind did not obey the morning's practical rhythm. Since Adekunle's message, a question had been beating inside her like rain on a fragile roof. What if he didn't know? Emeka appeared first in the hallway, his hair rumpled and his backpack dragging on the floor. Chidi followed, clutching the red toy car as if it were a battle amulet. Chiamaka smiled at them with a tenderness that hid the weight of the bills held by a magnet on the fridge. The rent was due in 4 days. The cooperative had delayed half her salary. The school needed supplies for an activity. None of this was new, but that morning, everything felt as if it were being watched by invisible eyes. "Mummy, is the man from the car coming back?" Chidi asked, climbing onto his chair. Chiamaka placed a cup of milk in front of him and took a breath before answering. She had spent the entire night rehearsing sentences that wouldn't turn fear into an inheritance. "He wrote to say he won't come without permission." Emeka tightened his fingers around his bread. "So he's polite." The innocence of the question almost hurt her. Chiamaka sat down opposite them, realizing she couldn't hate Adekunle on their behalf without robbing them of the chance to form their own feelings. "Politeness is a start, my love. But you know a person by what they do when the truth gets difficult. We don't know what he'll do yet." On the other side of the city, Adekunle Balogun had been up for hours, surrounded by documents, untouched cups of coffee, and the tense silence of someone who had traded the haste of power for the patience of a real investigation. Funke Adewale had arrived before 7 AM, carrying an unmarked folder and a look more severe than usual. Tunde Martins, for his part, sent reports in short bursts, each a piece of a puzzle that seemed to have been deliberately scattered by careful hands. The first piece of information was simple and devastating. Chiamaka had been fired from the Horizon NGO 3 months after their separation, under a vague accusation of breach of institutional conduct. There was no complete disciplinary file, only minutes signed by directors linked to mobility projects funded by partner companies of the Bellows. The second piece was worse. In the same period, a registry had recorded a power of attorney in the name of a lawyer called Barrister Emeka Uche, known for discreetly representing the interests of political families when they wanted to keep their fingerprints off the table. Adekunle read the name Emeka Uche 3 times. He remembered him from the Bellows' dinners, always on the fringe of the main conversations, smiling little and listening much. Men like Uche didn't threaten with loud voices. They showed up with papers, deadlines, stamps, clauses, and a courtesy that made violence seem like procedure. Adekunle felt his stomach clench as he imagined a pregnant Chiamaka facing someone like that, without money, without an influential family, perhaps believing that he himself had sent the emissary. "Did this man work for Zainab?" Adekunle asked. Funke showed him a page. "Not officially." Officially, he provided services to a cultural association run by her mother. But the association transferred funds to a smaller firm, and that firm opened the power of attorney linked to Chiamaka. It's a chain designed to exhaust any ordinary person and protect anyone powerful. Exactly. Adekunle walked to the window. The city gleamed under the morning sun, indifferent to the documents that were beginning to accuse. He thought of the boys having breakfast, perhaps at a small table. He thought of Chiamaka calculating bus fares while he discussed billion-naira mergers. And the shame returned with a clean cut. It wasn't just the possibility of having hidden children. It was the certainty that his name had been used as a weapon, even if his hand hadn't held it. Chiamaka dropped Emeka and Chidi off at school shortly before 8 AM. She kissed each of them on the forehead and watched until they disappeared through the blue gate, lost in a crowd of noisy children and colorful backpacks. She felt the urge to go in after them and ask the headmistress not to allow any visits, questions, photos, nothing. But she didn't want to seem like she was running. Her whole life had already been pushed into narrow corridors by people who had never needed to run. That day, she decided to walk to the cooperative with her head held high. The Open Route Cooperative occupied an old building near a busy square, offering after-school tutoring, reading workshops, and basic legal support for families displaced by public works. Chiamaka coordinated reports, talked to mothers, organized donations, and, when someone was absent, cleaned the rooms without complaint. Here, Her strategic talent survived amidst scarce resources. She knew how to cross-reference data, find inconsistencies, and turn scattered stories into solid complaints. It was precisely this competence that had made her dangerous to men who preferred the poor to be disorganized. That morning, her colleague BC noticed her paleness even before she said good morning. BC was a woman with a firm voice, short hair, and selective patience, capable of facing a dishonest supplier and a local government chairman with the same expression. She placed a stack of forms on Chiamaka's desk and lowered her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Chiamaka opened her computer. "I saw someone who should have stayed in the past. Adekunle." The name, spoken in that place, seemed too loud. Chiamaka glanced at the door. "I should never have told you so much. You told me because you needed to breathe." "That's not a crime." Chiamaka tried to focus on the reports, but the screen seemed to blur. The day's work involved families threatened with eviction due to a new BRT corridor, precisely one of the projects the Balogun group was trying to execute with political support from the Bellos. The irony was cruel. Years ago, she had met Adekunle while exposing flaws in similar projects. Now, the same surnames that had crushed her life were returning as signs on construction sites, promises of progress, and campaigns with smiling children on official posters. Near midday, Tunde watched the cooperative from a bakery across the street, without getting close. He had been a policeman before moving into corporate security, and carried in his eyes the melancholy of someone who had seen too much to be fooled by elegant narratives. He photographed only the facade, noted the times, and identified two men standing near the square for too long. They didn't look like journalists or locals. One of them took a call, glanced at the cooperative's entrance, and smiled in a way Tunde recognized. He sent the information to Adekunle with a short message. "She is already being watched by another team." Adekunle received the message during a meeting with financial directors. He interrupted a presentation on costs without explanation, stood up, and left the room, leaving confused executives staring at frozen graphs. In the hallway, he called Tunde. "Protect her without being seen." "Already on it, Oga. But I have to say something. Whoever sent these men doesn't just want to know where she is. They want her to notice." Adekunle clenched his fist. "Zainab, perhaps. Or someone trying to please Zainab before being asked." The difference was important and frightening. Power networks didn't always depend on explicit orders. It was enough for ambitious people to understand the desire of the center and move around it. Adekunle knew this mechanism well, because his empire had often worked the same way. A raised eyebrow in a meeting could destroy careers. Silence, in the face of abuse, could authorize things that would never be written down. For the first time, he wondered how many Chiamakas his company had produced without him ever knowing their names. In the early afternoon, Chiamaka went out to a nearby shop to make copies of some documents. She noticed the two men before she crossed the street, not because they were careless, but because years of fear had sharpened her perception. One pretended to read messages on his phone. The other stared into a shop window without seeing anything. Chiamaka felt her whole body go cold, but she didn't run. She entered the shop, asked for the copies, paid with coins, and used the reflection in the glass to confirm that one of them remained outside. When she returned to the cooperative, she found an envelope with no return address on her desk. BC was standing beside her, looking serious. "It came by dispatch rider. They said it was personal." Chiamaka opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph of her at the bus stop with the boys, taken the moment Adekunle approached. The image was printed in high quality. On the back, just one typed sentence. "Think about what your sons could lose." Chiamaka stood motionless, not out of surprise, but from recognizing the moral signature of that kind of threat. It was the same coldness from 5 years ago, when they had offered her money in exchange for her erasure. BC took the photo and turned pale. "We're going to the police." "And say what? That someone powerful sent me an unsigned threat? They'll file a report, put it in a drawer, and advise me to be careful. Then we go public." Chiamaka shook her head. "Not yet. If I speak without proof, they'll turn me into a desperate woman using children to target a rich man. That story is already written in their heads. I need to change my role before they open the stage." Her reasoning was cold, but her fingers trembled. BC noticed and held her hand. Chiamaka didn't cry. She had learned that tears in front of certain people became evidence against the victim. She put the photograph in a plastic folder, took a picture of the envelope, and noted the time, the name of the delivery company, and a description of the messenger. The woman many judged as fragile knew how to build a defense better than expensive lawyers. precisely because her survival had always depended on attention to detail. In the penthouse of the Balagun Group, Funke gained the first legal access to old records through a request to the registry. The power of attorney, linked to Chiamaka, authorized barrister Emeka Uche to negotiate, on her behalf, an agreement of a family nature with unidentified representatives. Chiamaka's signature was on the document, but the attestation was done in a distant registry office, on a date when hospital records showed she had an obstetric appointment in the morning. Funke cross-referenced the information and pointed out the inconsistency to Adekunle. She could have signed it after the appointment, he said, hating his own need to consider all possibilities. She could have. But look at this. On the same day, there was an urgent fee payment from an account linked to the Bello Foundation for Citizenship. Adekunle fell silent. The foundation was Zainab's public pride, specializing in campaigns for vulnerable children, single mothers, and education. The facade was impeccable. Photos of Zainab hugging children at charity events filled magazines and fundraising billboards. Now, the same structure appeared connected to the document that might have forced Chiamaka into silence. It was an almost poetic perversity, the kind of cynicism only families accustomed to applause could sustain without blushing. I want all transfers from that foundation to law firms, clinics, and NGOs over the last 6 years, Adekunle said. Funke looked up. That will get to the senator. And to your board. There are members who depend on licenses he brokers. Then we'll also find out which members of my board prefer licenses to the truth. Funke watched him for a moment. The man before her didn't seem impulsive. He seemed wounded, yes, but there was a new clarity in his voice. She knew many heirs who confused guilt with spectacle. Adekunle, at that moment, seemed to understand that reparation wouldn't come from flowers, houses, or surnames given in arrears. It would come from confronting the machine that had perhaps kept him comfortable. That choice, if seen through to the end, would be costly. It might cost more than he imagined. At the end of the day, Chiamaka found Adekunle waiting across the street, no car in sight, no apparent security, dressed with an unusual simplicity for him. Yet his presence altered the air. People like Adekunle didn't need ostentation to be recognized as a center of gravity. Chiamaka stopped at the entrance of the cooperative, feeling angry that he had come and, against her will, relieved that he hadn't invaded. BC stood a few steps behind, ready to intervene if necessary. I said I wouldn't come without permission, Adekunle said before she could get closer. You didn't reply. I shouldn't have come. But I heard they are following you. Her face hardened. You're the one who brought this back. Perhaps, and that's why I need to help stop it. Help. That word always arrives late from the mouth of someone powerful. Adekunle accepted the sentence without defending himself. Did you receive any threat today? Chiamaka hated that he was right. She hated even more realizing that if he knew, the network around her was bigger than it seemed. Who told you? People I asked to watch without touching your life. I know how that sounds. I know. It's an invasion. But there were men in the square, and I couldn't pretend I didn't see. She gave a low, humorless laugh. 5 years ago, men also showed up. A lawyer, a doctor, an NGO director, all saying it was better for me to accept reality. Reality, in their vocabulary, was you denying the pregnancy and offering money for me to disappear. Adekunle felt the sentence as if he already knew it, and yet was still unprepared. I never knew about the pregnancy. Chiamaka looked down at the cracked pavement. I wanted to believe that for a long time. Then life taught me that believing is expensive. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to tell me where to look. That response disarmed her for a second. Chiamaka had expected apologies, maybe promises, maybe the arrogance of a rich man offended by doubt. Instead, he asked for paths to proof. Her strategic side recognized its usefulness. Her wounded side suspected a trap. She opened her bag, took out the plastic folder, and showed him the photograph she had received that day without handing it over. Adekunle looked at the image and the sentence on the back. His face changed from personal pain to a dangerous calm. Can I take a picture of it? He asked. You can look at it, not possess it. Adekunle nodded, accepting the difference. Then look at me while I say this. Whoever threatened your sons will answer for it. But I won't move on anything in your name without your permission. Chiamaka held his gaze, searching for a lie. She found guilt, fear, and a determination she had known from before, when Adekunle hadn't seemed imprisoned by his own surname. For an instant, they weren't in front of the cooperative, but in an old buka, discussing urban ethics, while the rain beat against the window. The memory almost betrayed her. She closed the folder and lifted her chin. I have copies of a few things. Returned letters, a receipt from the registry, Old messages from the NGO, a test that my new doctor said was altered in the old system. Would you show them to me? Not today. Not because I trust you, but because our enemies might be the same. There's a difference. Adekunle received that concession as if it were more precious than forgiveness. I understand. No, Kunle, you still don't understand. You slept all these years thinking you were abandoned. I slept listening to 2 children breathe and wondering if the next day someone would take away the little we had. When you find out the truth, you might feel anger. I had to learn to live after it. The words hung between them until a distant horn broke the silence. Chiamaka left without a goodbye, walking to the stop where she would catch a bus to pick up her sons from a neighbor's house. Adekunle didn't follow her. He stood there with empty hands, understanding that his first task wasn't to win back Chiamaka. It was to recover the story that had been stolen from her, and perhaps from the boys. Love, if it still existed somewhere, would have to wait in line behind justice. That same night, Zainab called a discreet meeting in her apartment, far from her father's mansion and the old staff who had too many ears. Barrister Emeka Uche attended with a leather briefcase, accompanied by a PR consultant named Valeria Nunes, a specialist in destroying reputations without leaving explicit phrases. Zainab poured wine but didn't drink. Her irritation was enough to keep her awake. She hated Chiamaka, not just because of Adekunle, but because the woman's existence proved that something had escaped the Bellos' control. He's investigating, Zainab said. Uche adjusted his glasses. Then we need to make him look emotionally compromised. A powerful man committing follies over old guilt quickly loses credibility. Valeria opened her laptop and displayed a sequence of possible headlines for gossip blogs and news portals. Nothing was a direct accusation. Everything was suggestion. Billionaire's ex reappears on the eve of wedding. Children at the center of a fortune dispute. Sources close to the matter speak of a financial approach. Zainab read each phrase with cold satisfaction. The truth didn't need to be denied head-on. It just needed to be drowned in suspicion before it could breathe. Don't mention the boys by name, she said. I still want to seem concerned about them. Uche nodded. And about the school? Nothing against the children. Pressure on the mother. Check her rent, her job, her documents. There's always something when a poor person tries to survive. Valeria smiled. Tomorrow morning, the first story can circulate as a rumor, unsigned. Then, someone from the Balagun Group's board shows concern. In the afternoon, your father defends family stability in an interview about the mobility project. No one will seem to be attacking Chiamaka. Everyone will seem to be protecting Adekunle. Zainab looked out the window at the illuminated city. In another time, she might have wondered when she had become like this. But the Bellos didn't cultivate that kind of weakness. She had been raised to win, not to be loved. If Adekunle wanted to turn an old lover into a moral cause, she would turn that cause into mud. Chiamaka's mistake, Zainab thought, was believing that motherhood gave public nobility to a woman without a surname. In the real world, surnames still decided who was heard. While the first rumors were being prepared, Chiamaka arrived home with Emeka and Chidi, who had fallen asleep on the bus. Her neighbor helped her carry them up to the flat, and for a few minutes, there was only the simplest routine. Shoes off, blankets adjusted, cups washed, uniforms set out for the next day. Later, alone in the kitchen, Chiamaka opened a box hidden inside a cupboard. Inside were returned letters, tests, receipts, copies of messages, and an old photo of her and Adekunle. She touched the photograph without taking it out of the envelope. There was no pure nostalgia there. There was grief for a version of herself who had believed in promises without recognizing the price of speaking them near power. Chiamaka finally took out a folded sheet. It was the first letter she had sent to Adekunle after discovering the pregnancy, returned with a dry, impersonal stamp. Recipient. Refused delivery. She knew now that those words might never have reached him. That possibility didn't heal anything. It just changed the direction of the pain. In his office, Adekunle received a digital copy from Funke of a bank record linking Emeka Uche to payments made from an account associated with the Bello Foundation. Minutes later, Tunde sent images of the 2 men who had been loitering around the cooperative. One of them had previously worked on Senator Aliyu's campaigns. The lines were starting to connect. Adekunle felt a silent rage but didn't smile at the confirmation. Each piece of evidence brought the truth closer and deepened his guilt. The machine had existed, and he had been too comfortable to hear it. His phone buzzed close to midnight. It was a message from Chiamaka, short, without a greeting. Tomorrow, after I drop the boys at school, I can show you what I've kept. Public place, no tricks. Adekunle read the message as if receiving both a key and a sentence. He replied with only 2 words, "No tricks." Across the city, Zainab also received a message. The first story is scheduled for 6 a.m. She left her phone on the table and closed her eyes, satisfied. The next morning, before Chiamaka could open her box of documents, the city would begin to hear a fabricated story. And as Zainab knew better than anyone, many people preferred a well-dressed lie to a truth that forced them to choose a side. Chiamaka arrived at the cafe 20 minutes before the agreed time, not out of anxiety, but strategy. She chose a table against the wall, where she could see the door, the pavement, and the counter all at once. The place was near the boys' school and far from the restaurants where people like Adekunle were often recognized. She carried a brown folder inside her bag, protected by 2 ordinary shopping bags, as if documents capable of bringing down powerful families could survive better when disguised as household bills. Adekunle walked in without rushing, wearing a simple shirt and with no visible security. Still, Chiamaka noticed 2 things at once. He had respected her condition of not creating a spectacle, but he would never be truly unprotected. People like him moved surrounded by layers the ordinary world didn't see. What surprised her was seeing him stop at the door and wait for her to authorize his approach with a gesture. That small bit of care didn't erase 5 years, but it showed he finally understood the difference between approaching and invading. "You can sit," she said, keeping her voice low. Adekunle pulled the chair out slowly. Neither of them ordered coffee immediately. The small table felt too narrow for so many accumulated absences. Chiamaka watched his hands, remembering when those hands held books, cheap mugs, and her face after long arguments about justice. Now they were the hands of a man who signed billion-naira contracts and had perhaps signed off, even by omission, on her ruin. Adekunle was watching her too, but with a painful humility, like someone who knows that looking too long can seem like an entitlement. "Before any documents," he said, "you need to listen without interrupting." "I'll listen." She took a deep breath. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I got the letter where you ended everything. It was a dry letter, without your voice, saying our relationship had been an emotional mistake and that any insistence from me would be treated as blackmail. I went to your office twice. I couldn't get past reception. Then I sent letters. They all came back. When I went to your house, a lawyer met me at the gate." Adekunle closed his eyes for a moment but didn't speak. Chiamaka saw his effort not to defend himself and continued. She told him about barrister Emeka Uche, about the cold room where he offered her money, silence, and a move to another city. She told him she refused, even with morning sickness, even alone, because she believed Adekunle needed to know about his children. She told him that days later, the Horizon NGO opened a fake inquiry against her, and that previously friendly colleagues started avoiding her as if her pregnancy carried a moral disease. "The lawyer said you didn't want a scandal," Chiamaka continued. "He said your lawyers would prove I had made everything up for money. When I threatened to go to the press, he showed me copies of my messages taken out of context, our conversations, photographs. He said your family would destroy my credibility. I still thought he was lying in your name. Then came the altered medical file. My emotional state became a risk. My word stopped being a word and became a symptom." Adekunle felt a rage so deep he had to plant his feet on the ground to stay still. He knew about discrediting strategies. In corporate battles, they were called reputational risk management. In Chiamaka's life, they had been called reality. "I never wrote that letter," he finally said. "I never received yours. I never knew about the pregnancy. But that doesn't absolve me. I accepted your departure because it was easier to hate you than to face my family." Chiamaka looked at him, and the sincerity of that confession hit her in an unexpected way. She had prepared herself for elegant excuses, not for unadorned guilt. Still, she couldn't let his fragility take center stage in her pain. She opened her bag, took out the folder, and pushed the papers across the table. There were returned letters, registry receipts, a stained copy of the old test, messages from a director at the NGO, and the photograph she had received as a threat the day before. "This is what I kept," she said. "It's not everything. It's what I managed to save while changing diapers, looking for work, and learning to sleep in fear of a knock on the door." Adekunle only touched the edge of the first page, without pulling it towards him. "I can ask Funke to analyze them with you present. She's my legal director, but she owes no favors to my family or the Bellows. I'm not handing over the originals. I'm not asking you to. We can scan them here in front of you, or somewhere else you choose." Chiamaka lowered her eyes to the documents. The suspicious part of her wanted to gather everything and leave. The part that had spent years waiting for justice knew that proof locked in a box brings no one down. We'll scan them at the cooperative. BC will stay with me. Adekunle nodded. As you wish. His phone vibrated on the table, but he didn't look at it. Chiamaka noticed the effort and asked if it was Zainab. Adekunle saw that the answer mattered less for any impossible jealousy and more as a map of the danger. Probably. She and her father are already making moves. A story came out early this morning on a small blog, suggesting a former partner of mine reappeared with children on the eve of my wedding. No names, but enough details to attract vultures. Chiamaka stiffened. They want to turn me into a threat before I can prove I was threatened. Yes, then we need to be smarter, not faster. The phrase changed the air. For the first time since their reunion, Chiamaka wasn't speaking like someone cornered, but like a strategist. Adekunle recognized the woman who had faced his team years ago, dismantling expensive reports with simple, lethal questions. She took a napkin, asked the waitress for a pen, and began to draw a timeline. Pregnancy, letters, lawyer, firing, medical file, boy's birth, medical debt, recent threat, planted story. Each point got a date, a person, possible proof, and a risk. They're counting on me looking desperate, Chiamaka said. Single mother, poor ex-girlfriend, children who look like you. It's an easy story to sell. So we can't start with paternity. If we start there, they control the narrative. We need to start with the Bello Foundation and the families displaced by the transport projects. There are too many victims there for it to look like a private matter. Adekunle looked at her with growing respect. You still follow those projects? I never stopped. The cooperative serves people your company calls residual impact. People who lose their homes, schools, neighborhoods, support networks. The Bello Foundation shows up offering help, but it demands silence in exchange for benefits. I don't have complete proof, just patterns. Before, no one would listen to me. Now, maybe they'll listen because the scandal has touched you. The bitterness was fair. Adekunle didn't try to soften it. Then we'll do it the right way. First, we protect you and the boys. Then, we gather evidence that doesn't just depend on your story. After that, we take it to agencies that Aliyu doesn't control. And I will confront my board before they use me against you. You talk as if you still command everything. Maybe I'll find out I command less than I thought. Chiamaka put the folded napkin in her folder. That discovery usually hurts less for those with money. Adekunle took the hit without looking away. Perhaps, but this time I won't turn away from the pain. At the cooperative, BC received Adekunle with open suspicion. She wasn't impressed by his surname, his discreet watch, or his respectful posture. She told him to wait in the workshop room while Chiamaka prepared the documents for scanning. Adekunle obeyed, sitting on a blue plastic chair between posters painted by children and boxes of donated books. There, surrounded by peeling walls and maps of neighborhoods threatened by development, he better understood the scale of the distance that had separated him from the real city while he signed reports in air-conditioned rooms. Emeka and Chidi were still at school, which relieved Chiamaka. She didn't want her sons to see this man occupying their daily spaces before there were answers. BC turned on the old scanner, which creaked with every page. Funke arrived shortly after, at Adekunle's request, bringing a laptop not connected to the Balogun Group's systems. The legal director greeted Chiamaka without excessive sympathy, which was more welcome than any false warmth. Sincere people didn't need to decorate their actions with passion. For 2 hours they organized the evidence. Funke identified what was weak, what was strong, and what was explosive. The returned letters showed an attempt at contact. The receipts linked suspicious dates. The altered test would require technical confirmation. The firing from the NGO could reveal retaliation if cross-referenced with payments. The most important point, however, emerged when BC brought recent reports from the cooperative about families served by the Bello Foundation. 3 women had signed similar non-disclosure terms after reporting irregularities in resettlements linked to the mobility project. Adekunle read their names with a grim face. This was never just about Chiamaka. It's never just about one person, BC replied. One person becomes an example to scare the others. Chiamaka saw Adekunle absorb that sentence as a direct accusation. Part of her wanted him to suffer. Another, smaller and more troublesome part, saw in him not a satisfied enemy, but a man discovering that his public greatness might have been built on purchased silences. That realization didn't forgive him, but it made the story more difficult. It was simpler to hate the whole monster. It was more complicated to face someone who had failed out of pride, blindness, and convenience. As the afternoon wore on, Funke got a response from a source at the old registry. The attestation of Chiamaka's signature had been done by a clerk who had left her job months later and moved to Badagry. Her name was Lucia Ferraz. There was another unusual detail. The record book for that month had been replaced after a claim of water damage, but internal digital copies might have been preserved on a backup server. For Funke, it was a sliver of hope. For Chiamaka, it was the first breath she'd taken in years. "I know another Lucia," Chiamaka said suddenly. "Not from the registry. From the clinic." Everyone looked at her. Chiamaka clutched the folder to her chest, as if the memory needed to be held tight to keep it from escaping. "A nurse, Sister Agnes. She was on duty the day they did my first scan. She was kind to me. Months later, when I went back to ask for a copy of my file, she wasn't working there anymore. A receptionist said she had resigned abruptly. I thought it was a coincidence, but she looked at me like she wanted to warn me about something before she disappeared." Funke wrote down the name. This could be crucial. Altering a medical file doesn't happen without someone inside the system. If this nurse saw or copied something, she could confirm there was fraud. Adekunle looked at Chiamaka. "Can I ask Tunde to look for both women?" No direct contact. Chiamaka thought of the boys, the threatening photograph, the men in the square. The world was already closing in on her. The difference now was choosing who would walk beside her in the storm. "You can, but if they're found, I speak to them first." "Not you." Agreed. In the Bello mansion, Zainab read monitoring reports with growing impatience. The first story had circulated well, but it hadn't devastated Chiamaka as she had hoped. Some comments repeated the word opportunist. Others asked why a poor woman was being attacked before she had even spoken. The public doubt was still small, but Zainab hated any doubt she couldn't tame. Barrister Emeka Uche maintained the irritating calm of men paid to believe that every crisis fits into a well-drafted clause. "She's meeting with Adekunle and a lawyer," Uche reported. "At the cooperative." Zainab swirled the glass of water in her hands. How dare he take that seriously? Because children who look like him make any man sentimental. Don't reduce Adekunle to sentimentality. He's dangerous when he feels he's been deceived. Senator Aliyu Bello, sitting in a nearby armchair, closed his newspaper. Then the solution isn't to convince him that Chiamaka is lying. It's to convince him that believing her will destroy the children he just discovered. Guilty men accept their own losses, but they hesitate when losses are imposed on children. Valeria should prepare material about maternal instability without naming anyone yet. Uche, reactivate contact with the old clinic. I want to know who can talk. Uche nodded, but a shadow crossed his face. There are people from that time who have moved on. People move back when you remind them what they have to lose, Aliyu said. Zainab watched her father with bitter admiration. Aliyu didn't shout, didn't rush, didn't seem to threaten. He just rearranged others' fear, like someone moving furniture in a house. It was from him that she had learned never to beg for love. Love was unstable. It could humiliate. It could lead a man like Adekunle to cross the street for a woman in a simple dress. Power, on the other hand, remained when it was well defended. If Chiamaka wanted a moral war, Zainab would respond with a structural one. At night, Chiamaka allowed Adekunle to walk with her to the corner of the school, but not to the gate. Emeka and Chidi ran out, stopped when they saw him, and then slowed down like small animals facing something too big. Adekunle stood still, holding back his own urge to get closer. Chiamaka saw this effort and, though she said nothing, let the boys walk up to him. Emeka stood behind Chidi, who, as always, turned fear into attack. "Are you really Adekunle?" Chidi asked. "Yes." Mummy said, "You might be our father, but that's not enough." Adekunle crouched, maintaining a respectful distance. "Your mother is right." Emeka looked at his face with a seriousness old for a child. "Do you like toy cars?" The simple question almost broke Adekunle. He could have talked about luxury cars, factories, imported engines, but he understood that Emeka was offering a bridge the size a child could build. "I do, but I think I need to learn from you which ones are the best." Emeka gave a cautious smile. Chidi examined Adekunle for another second and declared that red cars were faster, even when the wheel was bent. Chiamaka watched the scene with a divided heart. There was tenderness there, inevitable, unfair, dangerous. She wanted to protect her sons from rejection, but also from her own bitterness. Adekunle didn't touch them. He didn't promise parks, toys, or houses. He just listened. And in that fragile beginning, listening was perhaps the only thing allowed. After the boys went to sleep, Chiamaka found a drawing in Emeka's backpack from school. There were 3 large figures and 2 small ones. A woman with brown hair, 2 boys, a Danfo bus, and a tall man standing outside it. Above the man, Emeka had written in crooked letters, "Maybe." Chiamaka sat on the floor of their room and cried silently for the first time since their reunion. She didn't cry just for the past. She cried because the future was beginning to demand choices that no mother could make without breaking apart. At the same hour, Adekunle faced an extraordinary meeting with 3 members of the Balogun Group's board. They all spoke of stability, reputational risk, political alignment, and prudence. None of them mentioned Chiamaka by name until Adekunle demanded it. When her name came up, it was accompanied by phrases like sensitive exposure and external interests. He realized with a cold clarity that some of these men had already received information from Zainab. The network was inside his company, using corporate language to repeat the old violence. "As of today," Adekunle said, interrupting a director, "any contract linked to the Bello Foundation will be audited by an independent team. Any attempt to interfere in my personal affairs using company resources will be treated as a grave violation. And whoever leaked information to the Bello family had better prepare an explanation better than prudence." The silence in the room was dense. One of the directors tried to smile. "You're emotionally affected." Adekunle placed his hands on the table. "Yes, and that might just make me less patient with the cowardice we used to call strategy." The sentence ended the meeting brutally. As he left, Adekunle knew he had just declared war on 2 fronts. Zainab would attack Chiamaka from the outside. The board would try to contain him from the inside. Aliyu would pull strings that might reach banks, the press, and government officials. Still, for the first time since the bus stop, he didn't feel lost. Chiamaka had given him a timeline, and timelines had a quality that lies hated. They demanded sequence, responsibility, and authorship. The next morning, Tunde found the first key person, not the clerk from the registry, but the nurse from the clinic, Sister Agnes. She lived in Epe, worked in a small lab, and when she heard the name Chiamaka Okoro over the phone, she fell silent for too long. Tunde didn't press, just said that Chiamaka wanted to talk and that no one else would be given her address. Hours later, Sister Agnes sent a reply by text. "I kept a copy, but if they find out, I'll lose everything." Chiamaka read the message on Tunde's phone screen inside the cooperative and felt her legs weaken. Adekunle was beside her but didn't try to hold her. Bisi, however, placed a chair behind her. The copy Sister Agnes claimed to have could prove the medical file was altered. It could show that the instability attributed to Chiamaka had been fabricated. It could dismantle the moral basis used to threaten her motherhood. But it also put another ordinary woman in the path of the Bello machine. "I'll go talk to her," Chiamaka said. Adekunle nodded. "Not alone. With Bisi and Funke." "You're not coming?" He accepted, though every muscle in his face showed resistance. Chiamaka noticed and, for the first time, explained without aggression. She needs to see someone who suffered the same system and is still standing. Not a billionaire saying everything will be different now. Adekunle lowered his head. "You're right." The simple admission hung in the air. Chiamaka felt something shift. Not enough for trust, but enough to acknowledge learning. She picked up her folder, her phone, and a light jacket. Before leaving, she looked at Adekunle. "While I'm talking to Sister Agnes, find out who on your board is feeding Zainab. If they control your company, they'll use your resources against us." "Us," he repeated, careful not to turn the word into a triumph. Chiamaka noticed and didn't correct it. The word had slipped out because the battle put them on the same side, not because the past was resolved. Still, Adekunle held on to that "us" as if it were a small light in a long hallway. Outside, an unfamiliar car drove slowly past the cooperative. Tunde photographed the license plate. The war was no longer a whisper. It was starting to gain an engine, a face, and a direction. Chiamaka adjusted her bag on her shoulder and went out to meet the first living witness to the truth. The journey to Epe began before the sun had fully asserted itself over the buildings. Chiamaka sat in the back seat next to Bisi, while Funke drove with the concentration of someone who preferred to be in control of the wheel when the road ahead was fraught with risk. The expressway seemed like a damp ribbon under the morning mist, and the silence inside the car was not empty but filled with calculations. Chiamaka held her bag on her lap, feeling the weight of the folder as if each document inside it was breathing. Finding Sister Agnes could either free her or expose another woman to the same fear. Sister Agnes lived in a narrow house, painted a faded blue, with pots of scent leaf lined up near the gate. When she opened the door, she looked smaller than Chiamaka remembered, perhaps because of her stooped shoulders and the restless way her hands moved over her apron. Her eyes, however, held the same nervous kindness from years ago. She looked at Chiamaka, then at Funke and Bisi, and almost closed the door out of instinct. Chiamaka took just one step forward, without invading her space. She knew how to recognize a person who had learned to survive by being invisible. "I didn't come to ask for a courage I haven't always had myself," Chiamaka said in a low voice. "I came to ask if you can still sleep at night with what you saw." The question cut through Sister Agnes like a clean blade. She brought a hand to her mouth and let out a short, ashamed sob. She invited them in without further resistance, looking twice at the street before closing the gate. The living room was simple, with photographs of a teenage boy in a school uniform, and a shelf filled with medicine, bills, and religious icons. Chiamaka didn't judge the woman's fear. Anyone with children and bills knew that heroism without protection was a beautiful word, invented by those who had never lost their job. Sister Agnes told her everything in broken sentences. At the clinic, Chiamaka had been seen with normal test results, stable vitals, and a healthy pregnancy. Days later, a doctor connected to the administration requested access to her file and altered notes about anxiety, unstable behavior, and resistance to medical advice. Sister Agnes found it strange because she had been present at the appointment and knew that Chiamaka had only cried, which was common for a pregnant and single woman. Before resigning, she copied the original and the altered versions onto a flash drive, fearing that one day she might need to prove she wasn't a party to it. Funke listened with rigor, asking questions about dates, names, systems, and times. Sister Agnes showed them the flash drive, hidden inside a sewing box and wrapped in cloth like a dangerous relic. Her hands trembled so much that Bisi had to pour her a glass of water. When Funke opened the files on the offline laptop, the truth appeared in code lines, digital timestamps, edit histories, and user IDs. Chiamaka stared at her own story, transformed into metadata. For years, they had called her pain instability. Now, the lie had a technical signature. "I wanted to find you," Sister Agnes confessed. "But they told me if I talked, my son would lose his scholarship, my husband wouldn't get his treatment, and I would be accused of breaching patient confidentiality. I was a coward." Chiamaka felt the old anger rise, but she didn't let it crush the wrong woman. Sister Agnes had failed, yes, but she had kept the copy when she could have destroyed everything. Cowardice is the name we give to fear when we're safe enough to judge. You kept the proof. Today, that matters. For the first time, Sister Agnes cried without trying to hide it. Funke explained that her testimony would need to be formalized, with legal protection, and that nothing would be released without a strategy. Chiamaka listened, but her attention was divided between the proof on the screen and a dark sense of foreboding. Zainab and Aliyu wouldn't stand still. If they had found Sister Agnes, others could reach her too. Before they left, Chiamaka urged her to spend a few days at her sister's house. Sister Agnes hesitated, then agreed when she thought of her son. On the way back, Funke's phone began to vibrate non-stop. She pulled over at a petrol station to check the messages. Her face hardened before she said anything. Bisi opened a news blog on her phone, and Chiamaka saw her life reduced to a dirty headline. Leaked audio reveals suspicious conversation between Billionaire's ex and lawyer. Below, an edited clip suggested Chiamaka was talking about using the children to secure money from Adekunle. The voice was hers, but the phrases were chopped, spliced, and torn from context. Chiamaka felt her stomach churn. She recognized the original recording from a call with barrister Emeka Uche years ago when he was trying to force her to accept money, and she kept repeating that she would not sell her children's future. In the published clip, the refusal was gone. All that remained were isolated words: money, children, Adekunle, agreement. The edit was crude for an expert, but perfect for public cruelty. Within minutes, comments multiplied. They called her a gold digger, a liar, an opportunist. Some said mothers like her should lose custody. "They got there first," Bisi murmured. Chiamaka didn't scream. The shock was so deep it became silence. She thought of Emeka and Chidi at school, of other mothers reading this, of teachers exchanging glances, of neighbors whispering in the hallway. She thought that Zainab understood something perverse about the world. Truth takes time. A lie only needs a headline. Funke was already on the phone with Adekunle, reporting the situation and telling him not to react publicly yet. Chiamaka heard her name in the conversation, but felt distant from her own body. Adekunle got the news in the middle of a board meeting. The large screen was displaying financial projections when an aide entered, pale, and handed him a phone. In seconds, The manipulated audio filled the room like toxic smoke. One board member called for an immediate suspension of any audit involving the Bellows. Another spoke of Adekunle taking a temporary leave of absence to preserve the company. The chairman of the board, Chief Bayo Balogun Adekunle's uncle, and a man who had always preferred profitable peace to difficult truth, tapped his pen on the table with studied irritation. "You brought this into the company, Kunle," Chief Bayo said. "Now we have to save the group from your personal recklessness." Adekunle looked up from his phone. An edited audio was planted to destroy a woman and 2 children. "If your first concern is the share price, then maybe the sickness runs deeper than I thought." The room reacted with discomfort. A director tried to mention fiduciary duty, but Adekunle cut him off. "Fiduciary duty is not a license for complicity. I want to know who here received this recording before it was published. I want the communication records with Barrister Emeka Uche, the Bello Foundation, and Senator Aliyu's aides. And I want it today." Chief Bayo smiled a tired smile. "You are not in a position to make demands. We've just voted on an emergency motion. Until this crisis is clarified, you are suspended from your role as CEO." The silence fell like an iron door. Adekunle looked around and saw faces turning away, some in shame, others in satisfaction. The move had been prepared for hours, maybe days. Zainab didn't just want to attack Chiamaka, she wanted to strip him of his ability to fight back. For a moment, the loss of his position, his access, and his corporate authority seemed absurd. Then, it became almost liberating. If his formal power was contaminated, he would have to fight in other ways, harder and less comfortable. "You can take my chair," he said, picking up only a pen and his notebook, "but you can't take the tracks you left to get to it." At Chiamaka's flat, the public storm arrived before she did. The landlord called, giving notice that the lease would not be renewed, citing neighbor complaints and concern over exposure. The coordinator of the cooperative called, crying with anger, to say that sponsors were demanding Chiamaka's temporary leave to avoid negative association. The school headmistress requested an urgent meeting about the children's safety. Each call was wrapped in polite words, but the message was the same. Her life was being dismantled piece by piece, without anyone having to admit to the violence. Emeka and Chidi sensed something was wrong when they got home. Chiamaka tried to be playful with their snacks, asking about drawings and homework, but Chidi saw the phone vibrating incessantly on the table. Emeka asked why a mother at school had looked at them strangely. Chiamaka knelt before them, feeling she could no longer protect them with absolute silence. She explained that people were telling lies about her because they were afraid of the truth. Chidi asked if the man, Adekunle, believed the lies. Chiamaka took a deep breath before answering. "No," she said. "He does not believe them." Emeka held Chidi's red car and asked if they would have to move. Chiamaka almost broke then, but she put her hands on her son's shoulders and chose an honesty free of panic. "We might need to stay somewhere else for a few days, just to be safer. But a home isn't just walls. A home is where the 3 of us are together, remembering who we are." Chidi's face scrunched up as he tried to be brave. "So they don't win?" "No," Chiamaka replied, kissing his forehead. "They just make noise." That night, Adekunle didn't come. He sent Tunde with an offer of discreet security and the key to an empty flat belonging to a former employee of Funke's, far from any known addresses and off the Balogun Group's grid. Chiamaka accepted only after confirming every detail with Bisi and Funke. She didn't want to owe Adekunle shelter, but she also wasn't going to confuse pride with protection. As she left the building with her sleepy sons, she felt eyes watching from behind curtains. The shame they were trying to force on her returned as organized anger. Zainab monitored everything through reports sent by Valeria. The audio dominated smaller blogs. Some society columns were already mentioning a crisis in the engagement, and board members had suspended Adekunle as planned. She should have felt relieved, but a subtle disquiet nagged at her. Adekunle hadn't rushed to deny paternity or defend their engagement. Chiamaka hadn't exploded publicly in despair. Their reaction was too slow to be weakness. Aliyu noticed the same thing as he had dinner with his daughter at the mansion, their plates almost untouched. "They've found some proof," he said. Zainab looked up. "How do you know?" "Because people with no proof shout. They are quiet." Barrister Uche arrived after 9 p.m., bringing confirmation that Sister Agnes had been visited. For the first time, Aliyu lost a bit of his color, not enough to look scared, but enough for Zainab to understand that the nurse mattered more than he had let on. Uche suggested discrediting Sister Agnes before she could testify, perhaps using the old breach of confidentiality as a threat. Aliyu grew thoughtful. Zainab, however, had a crueler idea, born from her understanding of Adekunle. Attack her custody of the children, she said. Not officially, not yet, but plant the idea. A mother under media investigation, without a stable job or secure housing, emotionally exposed. Adekunle will be paralyzed, trying to protect them, without looking like he's trying to take them from her. Uche nodded slowly. Aliyu watched his daughter with a dark pride. You've learned well. I've learned that love is a security flaw, Zainab replied. In the safe flat, Chiamaka put the boys to sleep on makeshift mattresses on the floor of a clean, memory-free room. Emeka fell asleep quickly, exhausted. Chidi pretended to be asleep until she stood up. Then he took her hand. Mummy, when people tell lies, does the truth get scared? Chiamaka sat beside him. The question was too simple for the complexity surrounding it. Sometimes it hides. But being scared isn't the same as giving up. Are you scared? She stroked her son's hair. I am. But I have you too. And that makes me bigger than the fear. When she left the room, she found Adekunle waiting in the hall, not inside the flat, but with the door open between them. He looked more tired than she had ever seen him. Without his title, without the armor of his office, without the certainty of command, he finally looked like a man facing consequences. Chiamaka didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. This silent boundary, respected by both, said more about the beginning of trust than any speech. I was suspended from the presidency, he said. Chiamaka absorbed the news without showing satisfaction. Zainab, my uncle. Board members who prefer contracts that are clean on the outside and rotten on the inside. All of them. In some way. I'm sorry. Adekunle looked at her, surprised by the compassion. Chiamaka saw it and hardened her expression. I'm not sorry you lost a chair. I'm sorry because this confirms the machine is bigger, and big machines crush those closest to the ground first. He nodded. Funke has already analyzed the audio. The edit is provable, but just publishing a defensive forensic report puts us in their game. We need to shift the story's focus to the medical fraud, the forced agreements, and the Bello Foundation. And Sister Agnes? She's safe for now. Funke is preparing a request for a protected deposition, but there's a risk they'll try to paint her as a criminal for keeping the copies. Chiamaka crossed her arms. Then I will go public. Adekunle stood motionless. You don't have to expose yourself now. I have to choose the form of the exposure before they choose it for me. I spent 5 years being described by fake documents, rumors, and letters that never arrived. If they're going to talk about me, let them see all of me. Not as a crying victim, but as a witness to what they did. Her firmness filled the hallway with an energy Adekunle recognized and admired. What do you have in mind? A recorded statement. Short. Without attacking Zainab directly. I'll show the returned letters. Say the audio was edited. Announce that the evidence has been handed over for independent analysis. And invite other women pressured by the Bello Foundation to contact the cooperative. They want to isolate me. So I'll open the door. Adekunle felt a painful pride. That's risky. Living in hiding was risky too. The recording was made the next morning in a simple room at the cooperative, before the sponsors could formalize her leave. BC set up a phone on a stack of books. Funke stayed off camera, giving only necessary guidance. Chiamaka wore a simple blue blouse, tied her hair back, and looked into the camera with serenity. She didn't ask for pity. She didn't mention her sons by name. She said a recording had been manipulated, that she had kept documents for years, and that other women might recognize the pattern of intimidation. Her speech lasted less than 4 minutes, but it carried 5 years of disciplined silence. When she finished, BC was crying. Funke just said it was legally sound. Adekunle watched from a distance on Tunde's phone, parked 2 blocks away so as not to make the statement about him. Seeing Chiamaka face the camera, he understood that Zainab had made her biggest mistake. In trying to reduce Chiamaka to a desperate mother, she had forced the world to meet the strategic, lucid, and unbreakable woman he had loved before he even knew how to respect. The response came faster than they expected. First, a retired teacher wrote to the cooperative, reporting that her daughter had signed a similar document after losing her home for a project. Then, a social worker sent receipts of strange payments from the Bello Foundation. By late afternoon, a woman named Patricia left a message saying, Barrister Emeka Uche had threatened to cut off her family's relocation allowance if she spoke to journalists. The voices started small, trembling, but together they formed something the Bello machine couldn't dismiss as a love affair. Zainab watched Chiamaka's statement 3 times. The first time, she laughed with contempt. The second time, she fell silent. The third time, she threw her phone at the sofa. The image of her rival was not that of an opportunist. It was of a woman who had survived without losing her precision. Worse, Chiamaka hadn't asked for Adekunle back, hadn't cried over the billionaire, hadn't used the boys as an emotional shield. She had moved the war to the public ground that Aliyu had always pretended to master, and on that ground, new witnesses were beginning to emerge. "Get that woman offline," Zainab ordered Valeria. "We've already tried mass reporting it. It didn't work. Copies are spreading. Then attack the cooperative." Valeria hesitated. That could look like retaliation. Zainab turned slowly, her eyes glinting. "It times retaliation. The art is in making it look like an audit." While the counteroffensive was being planned, Funke received confirmation from the preliminary forensic analysis of the manipulated audio and the altered medical file. The two reports together created a powerful bridge between the old lie and the recent one. Adekunle met with her, Tunde, Bisi, and Chiamaka at the safe flat after the boys were asleep. On the table were proofs, names, timelines, and an unexpected summons. The public commission evaluating the urban mobility project had scheduled a hearing for the following week, pressured by the emerging allegations. "Aliyu will be there," Funke said. "Zainab too, probably. The Balogun Group's board will try to present Chief Bayo as the new institutional face. They want to show stability." Chiamaka looked at the scattered documents. "Then that's where we show the pattern." Adekunle hesitated. "That hearing will be an arena. They'll have allies, cameras, experts, lawyers, people prepared to interrupt and discredit you. If anything goes wrong, they'll use it against you." Chiamaka looked up at him. "Adekunle, everything they've already used against me was born from my forced silence. I'm not giving them any more silence." Bisi smiled sideways, proud. Funke began to organize the order of the evidence. Tunda reported that he would increase security for the witnesses. Adekunle realized he was no longer commanding this battle alone, and perhaps he never should have. Chiamaka was at the center, not as a fragile piece to be protected, but as an indispensable mind. This truth both diminished him and freed him. Loving someone, he was beginning to understand, might mean stopping trying to be a savior and accepting being an ally. Near midnight, when everyone else had left, Adekunle remained in the hallway for a few seconds. Chiamaka was closing the folder on the table. He looked at her without crossing the threshold. "I wish I could go back 5 years. She didn't raise her face immediately. "I wish that too, many times. Then I stopped. Going back would erase my sons, and nothing in this world is worth that." Adekunle swallowed the pain with respect. "Then I will walk forward, if you'll let me walk beside you without getting in the way." Chiamaka approached the doorway. There was tiredness in her eyes, but also a stern light, born of someone who chooses to fight knowing the cost. "Permission isn't forgiveness, and walking beside me doesn't give you the right to decide my destiny." "I know. Still, tomorrow, you can come to the meeting with Funke. We have a hearing to win." Adekunle nodded. That small authorization didn't heal the past, but it indicated that the future, though wounded, could still be built on truth. Chiamaka closed the door slowly, leaving him outside, where he belonged for now. Inside, the boys slept. Outside, the city prepared for another battle. Between the two spaces, justice was finally ceasing to be an abstract word and beginning to take the form of documents, witnesses, courage, and confrontation. The week leading up to the hearing felt long enough to age everyone who held the truth in their hands. Chiamaka woke before the boys, reviewed documents after they slept, and spent her days between the cooperative, the safe flat, and meetings with Funke, Bisi, and the women who were starting to lose their fear. Adekunle, officially suspended from command, worked from a room borrowed from Tunde, with no corporate logo, no assistants. For the first time in his adult life, his power came not from a chair but from his willingness to lose privileges, to uphold a single piece of proof. Emeka and Chidi sensed the tension, despite their mother's care. They knew the atmosphere at school had changed, that a teacher now walked them to the gate, that Bisi visited often, bringing fruits and stories that were a little too funny to be natural. Chiamaka didn't hide that people were telling lies, but she didn't burden her sons with the full weight of the war. Adekunle saw them in brief, always authorized, always simple encounters. He brought books, not expensive gifts, and listened to Chidi explain imaginary car races as if he were receiving instructions from a chief engineer. The day before the hearing, Emeka asked if Adekunle would leave when it was all over. Chiamaka heard the question from the kitchen and froze, holding a washed cup. Adekunle was sitting on the living room floor in front of a racetrack made of tape. He looked at the boy and didn't answer quickly, because promises made to children had to be stronger than the desire to comfort. Chidi stopped beside his brother, pretending to fix a bent wheel, but he too was waiting for the answer. "I don't want to leave," Adekunle said. "But staying in your lives depends on the trust I can build with your mother and with you. I arrived late, so I have to learn to arrive right." Emeka thought for a few seconds, too serious for his years. Arriving right means not scaring people. Adekunle felt the sentence open a new humility in him. "Then I'll start there." Chiamaka turned her face to hide her emotion. She didn't know if this was love being reborn or just pain finding a less dark place. She didn't want to name it yet. That night, after the boys were asleep, she laid out the clothes she would wear to the hearing. A simple white shirt and dark trousers. Nothing that asked for pity, nothing that imitated Zainab's elegance. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw dark circles, lines of exhaustion, and firmness. She saw the woman who had been publicly destroyed and was still standing, now accompanied by other voices. The hearing took place in the auditorium of a technical mobility committee, before journalists, residents affected by construction, business representatives, and political aides. Senator Aliyu Bello arrived, surrounded by well-wishers, wearing a paternal smile that turned cynicism into experience. Zainab was by his side, impeccable in a light-colored dress, the perfect image of public concern. Chief Bayo Balogun appeared as the group's acting CEO, trying to sell stability to reporters. When Adekunle entered without a tie, accompanied by Funke and Tunde, the cameras swarmed like hungry birds. Chiamaka arrived last, not hiding, but flanked by Bisi, Sister Agnes, and 3 women from the cooperative, who had agreed to testify. The buzz in the room changed texture. The media narrative had expected a tearful ex-lover or an aggressive mother. It found a silent woman, with a steady gait, watchful eyes, and documents held neatly against her chest. Zainab watched her with an almost physical aversion. The mistake of underestimating Chiamaka now had an audience. Aliyu, more experienced, sensed the danger and smiled even wider, because men like him only admitted fear in the form of cordiality. The committee chairman opened the session with formal language, calling for order and reminding everyone that the official topic was the urban mobility project and the allegations regarding resettlements. Chief Bayo spoke first, describing the Balogun Group's commitment to ethics, development, and institutional cooperation. His voice was polished, but Adekunle heard in it the cowardice of someone who turns abuse into a footnote. Aliyu spoke next, lamenting unjust attacks on philanthropic institutions and insinuating that personal interests were contaminating a debate essential for millions of working citizens. Zainab requested the floor as the director of the Bello Foundation. She spoke of the children they served, the mothers they supported, the scholarships they awarded. Her performance was nearly perfect. Her voice trembled at the right moments. Her eyes shone without spilling tears. Her hands remained open on the table. She stated that no woman should be used as a weapon in corporate or sentimental disputes. The line made some journalists look at Chiamaka. Zainab noticed and pressed on, confident she could still dress her aggression in silk. "It pains me to see private stories exploited to block a public project," Zainab said. "My commitment has always been to protect vulnerable families, including when misguided individuals try to turn them into instruments of moral blackmail." Adekunle started to stand up, but Chiamaka discreetly touched the edge of the table, not him, just the space between them. It was a small signal they had agreed on the night before. Don't react to the theater before the proof. He took a breath and sat down. Chiamaka requested the floor. There was a stir in the auditorium. Zainab tilted her head as if graciously granting a concession to a lesser opponent. Aliyu watched the papers in front of the woman, trying to guess which one should have been destroyed years ago. Chiamaka didn't open with her love story, or with paternity, or with the edited audio. She opened with a spreadsheet of families displaced from areas near the construction sites. She showed protected names, dates, promised compensation amounts, non-disclosure agreements, and transfers from the Bello Foundation to intermediary firms. She spoke without rushing, explaining the pattern. Poor women received aid conditioned on their silence. Complaints disappeared. Social reports were altered. With each piece of data, the room shifted. The scandal ceased to be romantic and became structural. Funke projected documents onto the screen, all previously filed to avoid accusations of manipulation. The committee received copies. Bisi presented reports compiled by the cooperative. Patricia, one of the displaced mothers, stood up with a trembling voice and told them that Barrister Emeka Uche had threatened to cut off her family's allowance if she spoke to the press. Then came Sister Agnes. The nurse walked to the microphone as if crossing an icy river. Chiamaka held her gaze, not to pressure her, but to remind her that neither of them was alone. Sister Agnes explained Chiamaka's appointment, the original version of the medical file, and the subsequent alteration made by an administrative user linked to the clinic. Funke presented the preliminary forensic report with dates, digital timestamps, and technical discrepancies. The auditorium, once noisy, fell silent. Aliyu whispered something to Uche, but the lawyer no longer looked comfortable. Zainab kept her face a mask, but her hands clenched on the table. The private story she had tried to turn to mud was now revealing the method used against other women. When the manipulated audio was mentioned, Zainab tried to interrupt, claiming it was not the subject of this hearing and that Chiamaka was seeking victimhood. Chiamaka waited for the chairman to restore order, then replied without raising her voice. She explained that the edited audio followed the same technique as the previous frauds, cutting context, manufacturing instability, and turning victims into threats. Funke displayed the forensic analysis, showing the cuts and splices. Then, Chiamaka authorized the playback of a longer portion of the original call, in which she refused money and demanded that Adekunle be told about the pregnancy. Chiamaka's younger, more desperate voice filled the auditorium. There was no blackmail. There was fear, dignity, and a sentence that made Adekunle lower his eyes. "I don't want to sell my children. I want their father to know they exist." His composure almost broke then, but he remained quiet. His pain was not supposed to be the centerpiece. Zainab saw the impact and made the mistake Aliyu had always feared. She stood up before controlling her fury. "That doesn't prove Adekunle wanted to know," she said sharply. "It only proves she insisted on going where she wasn't wanted. Families like ours have to protect themselves from people who confuse proximity with entitlement." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't just shock, it was recognition. Zainab had dropped the mask of the social protector and revealed the hierarchy that propped up her public kindness. Chiamaka looked at her without triumph. Aliyu closed his eyes for a second, knowing his daughter had opened a dangerous door in front of the cameras. Adekunle then asked for the floor, not as the CEO of the group, but as a directly cited citizen. The committee hesitated, then allowed it, pressured by the general murmur. He stood up slowly. "For 5 years, I believed Chiamaka left of her own choice. It was convenient to believe that, convenient for my pride, for my family, and for the business deals that benefited from her silence, and the silence of others. Today, I state publicly that I never received the letters she sent. I was never informed of the pregnancy, and I never authorized any agreement to erase her. But I also state that my ignorance does not lessen the damage caused in my name." Chief Bayo tried to interrupt, claiming Adekunle didn't speak for the group. Adekunle turned to him. "You're right. Today, I don't speak for the group. I speak against all those who use the group as a shield for their cowardice." The sentence exploded into murmurs. Funke then presented the internal records legally obtained by the independent audit before Adekunle's suspension. There were communications between board members, aides to the Bellows, and firms linked to Uche. There were cross-payments, coinciding dates, requests for pressure on the NGO that fired Chiamaka. Chief Bayo turned red. Uche requested a recess. Aliyu maintained his composure, but his right hand trembled slightly on his pen. The committee chairman ordered the immediate forwarding of the documents to the EFCC and the oversight body responsible for public contracts. Journalists began firing questions. Valeria, Zainab's aide, tried to lead her client out through a side exit, but Zainab refused. Pride kept her trapped on the stage. She pointed at Chiamaka and said, loud enough for the microphones to catch it, "A woman with nothing can't bring down an empire." The sentence raced through the room like fire on dry cloth. Chiamaka simply replied with the calm of someone who no longer needed to shout. "I didn't come to bring down an empire. I came to stop it from continuing to trample on children, mothers, and families you call nothing." It was the end of the performance. Aliyu stood and tried to turn the defeat into a strategic withdrawal, but 2 legal aides from the committee blocked his exit to inform him he would be formally served. There were no cinematic arrests, no shouting. There was something heavier, more real. People accustomed to never answering for anything were now being forced to sign receipts, hand over copies, and listen to questions. Zainab, white with rage, stared at Adekunle one last time, perhaps hoping to find regret. She found only grief for what he had almost chosen. In the days that followed, the city talked of nothing else. The full audio circulated. The forensic reports were confirmed by independent experts, and new witnesses contacted the cooperative. The Bello Foundation had its accounts frozen. Barrister Emeka Uche lost clients even before he lost his professional license. Chief Bayo was removed by his own board, pressured by investors and regulators. Aliyu still tried to deny direct knowledge, but documents signed by close aides and recovered messages narrowed his path. Zainab disappeared from public events, surrounded by lawyers and the ruins of her carefully crafted image. Adekunle returned to the presidency months later, but not as an untouched victor. The audit revealed deep flaws in the Balogun Group, tainted contracts, and decisions he should have questioned earlier. He accepted sanctions, broke alliances, sold assets linked to the Bellos, and created a reparations fund managed by independent entities. It was not for his own vanity. The press tried to make him a repentant hero, but he refused interviews focused on him, saying only that reparation was not a spectacle and that Chiamaka's courage had stopped a lie from continuing to yield dividends. Chiamaka returned to her old flat only to pick up what was left. She decided not to stay. With legal support, she recovered her employment compensation and received damages for the proven harm, but she refused any solution that would make her dependent on Adekunle. She continued at the cooperative, now strengthened by transparent donations and public oversight, and became the coordinator of a program defending families affected by urban development. When journalists called her the billionaire's ex, she would correct them serenely. I am Chiamaka Okoro, a mother, a social technician, and a witness to what dignity can survive. The DNA test was done without cameras, without announcements, and without public pressure. Emeka and Chidi were Adekunle's sons. The result surprised no one, but it still changed everything. Adekunle cried alone in the lab's car park before getting into his car. Chiamaka, upon receiving the report, sat between the boys and explained that now there was an important answer, but that love would continue to be built day by day. Chidi asked if this meant 2 birthdays. Emeka asked if he could practice drawing the new surname before deciding to use it. The decision on the name came later, in conversation, guided by a psychologist, lawyers, and above all, the children's wishes. They added Balogun without losing Okoro, because Chiamaka insisted that her sons know they weren't receiving an identity from a rich man, but rather piecing together parts of a story finally told in full. Adekunle signed the acknowledgement with a steady hand and a devastated heart. Beside him, Chiamaka didn't smile like the rediscovered wife from an easy romance. She smiled like someone who had walked through a lie and preserved herself. The relationship between them didn't go back to how it was, because nothing worthwhile returns by ignoring the ruins. There were visits, difficult conversations, corrected memories, old angers resurfacing on unexpected days. Adekunle learned to pick up the boys from school without turning every encounter into an event. He learned to hear Chiamaka say no. He learned that asking for forgiveness didn't entitle him to receive it. Chiamaka learned, slowly and without blaming herself, that trusting again wasn't a betrayal of the woman who had survived alone. It was allowing that woman to rest for a few minutes. A year later, the cooperative held a small party to open a community library, funded by reparation money but managed without any billionaire's name on the facade. Emeka and Chidi ran among the new shelves, fighting over who would be first to show Adekunle their drawing taped to the wall. Chiamaka watched from a distance, wearing a simple green dress, her hair down, her face lighter. Adekunle approached her with 2 cups of juice and handed one to her without invading her silence. They want me to see the car track behind the library, he said. Then you should go. Chidi will be expecting a performance. Adekunle smiled. There was tenderness, but also respect. Before I go, I wanted to ask if I could have dinner with you all on Saturday. Nothing big. I'll cook, if you're willing to risk it. Chiamaka raised an eyebrow. You know how to cook? I'm learning. Emeka says pasta counts. She laughed, and the sound wasn't the same as 5 years before. It was lower, more mature, shot through with loss, but true. Adekunle didn't try to grasp that laugh like a promise. He was just grateful to hear it. Chiamaka looked at her sons, then at the library full of mothers, children, and elders who had found a collective voice. She thought of the woman at the bus stop, shopping bags in hand, fear in her heart, trying to hold her world together alone. She wanted to hug her across time and tell her she would not be erased. Saturday? That could work, Chiamaka replied. But no grand promises. Adekunle nodded. No grand promises. Just presents. Emeka ran up, pulling Chidi by the arm. They both called for Adekunle and Chiamaka at the same time, a mix of requests, laughter, and small urgencies. For a moment, the 4 of them stood in the cool shade of the entrance, surrounded by the smell of new books and simple cakes. They were not a perfect family, because perfection belonged to Zainab's fake I am photographs and Aliyu's empty speeches. They were something better. They were people trying to build a livable truth, with visible cracks and, at last, clean foundations. Chiamaka took each son's hand and walked with them into the yard. Adekunle walked beside them, not in front. The city was still harsh, unequal, and full of powerful machines. But in this small space, there were children reading, women talking, men listening, and documents turned into reparation. Chiamaka knew new battles would come, because justice wasn't a closed ending, but a daily practice. Still, seeing Emeka and Chidi laughing in the afternoon light, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope.